Good afternoon. Anthony Owen, Arkansas Department of Education, Chief State STEM Officer and State Director of Computer Science. I have the pleasure of introducing again today. He actually did a speech earlier today down in our STEM playground, but a gentleman who I think you're going to find inspirational. I was talking to him a little while ago behind the stage, and I told him, I said, when I was watching his speech earlier in the STEM playground, I had to chide myself a bit because his energy and his passion is just what I sometimes wish that I could conjure up. He's just such a great guy, and I think you're going to find this an enjoyable session. Dr. Sonny Magana was an award-winning teacher. He is a best-selling author and is a pioneer in educational technology research. He spent 4 decades bringing together the research for his latest book, Disruptive Classroom Technologies. If you have not received your signed copy of that, please visit us in the STEM playground. Dr. Magana is signing copies of those. We have a limited number to give away. In this book, he introduced the T3 framework for innovation to wide international acclaim. He's going to talk to you a little bit about this, but since we actually had him agree to come speak to us, we actually he has a lot of more information about how his framework has been reviewed and researched, and the credibility behind it has just been risen to a great level. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce and bring to the stage Dr. Sonny Magana. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you kindly. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you for joining me. My name's Sonny Magana, and I love 3 things. 3 things I love. I love teaching, I love music, and I love my wife, but not necessarily in that order. So what I'm going to share with you is a framework that I've developed that incorporates 2 of my 3 great loves, music and teaching. Tracy is not a part of this workshop, but she's everywhere. I call it the T3 Framework for Innovation, and I call this work really a moonshot, and there's a reason for that. By the way, I'd like you to join this conversation because this is not the end. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of what I hope is a long conversation about how to reliably use digital tools. So follow me on Twitter @Sonny Magana with the hashtag T3Challenge. And I'd like you to consider this. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy implored Americans with a vision that was at once impossible, quixotic, and genius. And that was, within a decade, the United States would put a human being on the moon. What he did is he challenged us to go beyond what our expectations were, go beyond what we thought we could do. And in 1969, I was an 8-year-old kid, and I had a kind of a penchant for getting into trouble. But I stopped playing outside for one afternoon and went into my parents' living room, where on the black and white TV, I saw Neil Armstrong descend from the lunar module onto the Earth's surface. And it just struck me as something that was awe-inspiring, that we can do things that are well beyond what we think is possible. We can achieve the impossible if we believe in ourselves and believe in our abilities. What I'm going to share with you now is what I think is a moonshot. This is a moonshot in education. This is our time to do the impossible and to double student achievement. To double student achievement using digital tools. So the first thing I want you to do is imagine, what would that look like? What would it look like to double student achievement? The next question is, well, how are we going to get there? How can we reliably double student achievement? And that may not just mean having students learn twice as much content, but maybe learn twice as fast. How is it possible to do that? And I'm going to talk to you about the T3 Framework for Innovation, which is a framework that I developed to achieve exactly that, to double student achievement, using reliable methods and digital tools. But let me tell you a little bit first about, I'm a researcher first and foremost, so I engage in academic research. But there's actually 5 levels of research. Think in this next section, which of these levels do you see most prominently when it comes to educational technology tools. And the first is personal experience. This is anecdotal evidence. Somebody sharing their opinion of what works or what doesn't work. The second is collective experience. We've got 2 or more people sharing an experience. That's not really valid, doesn't have a lot of reliability, and it's open to bias and errors. The third level is systematic observation, and that's when we engage in a scientific process to reduce, to mitigate errors and biases so that we can see the true nature of relationships. The fourth level is what we call compounding evidence, and that's when we have not just one study or a handful of studies, but dozens, hundreds of studies that purport the same relationship between variables. And the fifth level is the preponderance of evidence. That's when we have thousands of studies that purport a relationship between 2 variables, like technology and achievement. Now, at that level, the preponderance of evidence, that's what we call meta-analysis. Because that's when researchers have developed the process to study thousands of studies, and from them analyze the evidence and generate an effect size. Now, effect size and meta-analysis were techniques developed by Jean V. Glass in the 1970s. And he did it for 2 reasons. He did it for 2 domains, medicine and education. And in medicine, we want our physicians to make the most reliable choice when it comes to our health care. The same should hold for education. We should make the best decisions based on the largest sampling of information so we can find the most reliable methods. And that's where John Hattie comes in, because John Hattie has taken the field of meta-analysis within education and advanced it to a new level. In his book, Visible Learning, which is something every educator should read and get to know, he says that effect size is the most reliable way to determine what has a positive impact on student achievement. It's the most reliable way, because you're not just relying on level 1 or level 2, you're relying on level 5 analysis, the preponderance of evidence. And he made it easy for us. He created this scale, a Hattie scale, from effects that have a negative impact on student achievement, have a medium impact, and a very high impact on achievement. The point 4 I want you to pay attention to, because that's the average. The average of all the influences he studied has an effect size of 0.4. Anything above that is desirable. Anything below, not so much. So now I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to guess, what do you think the effect size of technology is? Have a conversation with the person next to you. What do you think the effect size, using Hattie's meter, what is the effect size of technology, the average effect of technology on student achievement? Say that one more time. Well, then this may surprise you, because Hattie said there have been 161 meta-analyses. He studied over 10,000 studies and found the average impact of technology on student achievement to be 0.34. 0.34. So look at that scale. The average of all the influences he studied is 0.4. The average impact of technology, less than the average impact of all the influences he studied. An argument can be made that technology has had a deleterious impact on student achievement. Here's the thing that's the most alarming, is that this effect has not changed in the last 50 years, despite phenomenal changes in the technology. So think about the technology in 1969 that was available in schools, to now, where students walk around with one of the most powerful computing devices on planet Earth in their pockets. The arc of evolution in technology has been extraordinary, and yet the impact is still frustratingly low. So this engenders a question. Have we developed, at considerable cost and effort, schools that are technologically rich but innovatively poor? I mean, that's an essential question. That's a really important question. So now I want you to chew this over. So turn to the person next to you and have this discussion. Were you surprised by Hattie's findings? Why or why not? Have a quick discussion. Well, I'll tell you, I wasn't surprised at the finding itself, at the 0.34. What I was surprised at is that it hasn't changed in 50 years. That should be a clarion call. That should be an alarm bell for all of us. But, all right, so now we know the preponderance of evidence shows that technology's had a very dismal impact on student achievement. I want to know why. Why? What is it about? Is it the technology? Is it about how we use it? Why is the impact so low? That's a better question. We really need to focus on a language of accountability rather than a language of blame. So, okay, now that we know the impact of technology is so low, why? And if we know why, then we can reasonably determine what we can do about it. I think I know why. And so I'm going to give you an analogy. I think we've been engaged in a shift in these United States, a shift that's a planar shift. We've been moving from a digital age system to, from a industrial age system to a digital age system. And all we've been doing is adding technology to an existing system. So let me give you a visual. We've taken a 20th century donut and put 21st century frosting on it. If you scrape away the frosting, you got a stale donut. We need to rethink the very structure of teaching and learning in this digital age. And I think that requires an axial shift. An axial shift. We need to change our axes and stop just adding technology to existing practices, but have a new shift where we move away from students memorizing old knowledge to a new system that's focused on student mastery and well-being, whole child mastery and well-being. That's not a technological change. That's the solution to this issue is not a technological solution. It's not a mechanistic solution. The change that has to happen is a change in consciousness from just memorizing old knowledge to whole child mastery and well-being. And that's why I wrote this book, Disruptive Classroom Technologies, to help support that change, the change in systems. And that's what I want to talk about. But first, let me sum up all my research, because I've been researching the impact of technology in education for 38 years. The very first study I did was in 1983, and the technology that I looked at was a new gee-whiz technology called the Apple II computer. And the software that I was studying was called the Oregon Trail. Remember that? All right, show of hands. How many of you drowned in the Blue River? There you go, okay. All right, how many of you lost an oxen? Or broke a leg, or got snake bit? What did you learn, really? What we found was that students' engagement was really high at first when they first started going on the Oregon Trail. And over a very short period of time, that engagement dropped ridiculously low. And the reason the engagement was so high was the novelty of the experience. Kids were learning with a new tool, and they were playing this game, and it was novel. So their engagement was bumped up artificially, but it wasn't sustainable, because novelty is not sustainable. It's the first time you see something, it's going to be novel. After that, not so much. I've synthesized over 35 years of research into this very simple metaphor. And it's a rock and roll metaphor because it's one of my passions, music. Music, teaching, and Tracy. Again, not necessarily in that order. But here's my metaphor. When it comes to modern teaching and learning in the digital age, we need to listen. If you listen to the melody of that beautiful song, Because, and the Beatles' Abbey Road, the final album, you hear three human voices raised to one of the most sonically beautiful expressions of human emotion. The melody, is sung by John Lennon, is inestimably enhanced by the low harmony of George Harrison and the high harmony of Paul McCartney. If you listen to the melody without the harmonies, it's not the same impact. If you listen to the harmonies without the melody, you lose some value. You lose something inestimable. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So here's my metaphor. When it comes to modern teaching and learning, high-impact pedagogy is the melody. High-impact technology use adds the harmonies. And together, you get great music. High-impact pedagogy is the melody. High-impact technology use adds the harmony. Together, you get great music. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, that's a pretty solid metaphor, I think, and it bears up. Here's how I came up with that metaphor. As I told you, I'm a musician. When I was 14 years old, I taught myself how to play guitar. And I was just really interested in expressing myself musically. So I would listen to the songs that I'd hear on the radio. This is 1976. And I'd listen to things like the Eagles and John Denver and the Beatles, and would transfer what I heard on the radio and learned how to translate them onto my six-string guitar. I played Country Roads like hundreds of times. So if there was a campfire, chances are I was the kid sitting around the campfire playing a guitar, playing Country Roads, happy as a clam, until I heard this. I couldn't go back to Country Roads. You know, I was so disrupted by this sound that I heard from an electric guitar that I had to know more. I was compelled by this disruption in my own musicality. I was compelled to learn more. And I actually happened to listen to an interview on a local radio station in Philadelphia where Eddie Van Halen was speaking. And he said, the DJ asked him, do you have any advice for budding guitarists? And he said, yes, I do. He said, if you're the kind of kid that's sitting around the campfire playing a guitar, keep doing that. That's good for you. Keep doing that. But if you want to get better, you got to realize that you're in a stage. You're in a stage. I call that the campfire stage. And if you want to get better, you have to go through another stage that every great guitarist has gone through. And it's called great music. Eddie said, you got to learn to play like Chuck. You got to learn all those riffs and learn the 1-4-5 pattern of rock and roll, and learn the pentatonic scale, learn how to adjust the scale, learn how to transpose in different keys, play up and down the neck of your guitar, use the whole instrument. Chuck Berry almost single-handedly invented rock and roll by transforming the music that we knew of as the blues and gospel and soul and R&B. And every rock and roll song that you hear, you're now in 2019, has its roots in Chuck Berry's way of playing. And Eddie said every great guitarist has got to go through that stage before you get to the final stage where you're transcending the limits. You're creating something that's never been created before. You're sharing your own voice and expressing who you are emotionally and musically. So that stayed with me all my life, since 14 years old. And I use that Eddie Van Halen guitar playing framework as the inspiration for my framework that I call the T3 framework for information. Because the three T's stand for the three domains of technology use: translational, transformational, and transcendent. Translational, transformational, transcendent. Translational, transformational, transcendent. Now let's take a look at each one. I'm going to dive into the translational domain, because that's what we use technologies to simply digitize what we previously did in an analog fashion. So really, the word translate comes from the Latin word translare, which means to ferry across. And all we're doing is keeping the message intact, but changing the mode of that expression. So we're just really going from analog to digital. We're putting 21st century frosting on a 20th century donut. We're going from pencil and paper to ones and zeros. The average impact of that? 0.34. Not very great. There's two elements to the translational domain of technology use. One is called, I call it automation, and it's not insignificant. Automation is a force. It allows us to save time, to increase our efficiencies, and reduce errors. This is the most predominant way that technologies are used in our schools across these United States, for data storage, for record keeping. You know what the number one use of technology is in schools? Testing. Automating testing. It's the most prominent use next to communication. It's important, but we can do more. The second element is consumption, and that's where students are just consuming information and data from a digital source, whereas once they would consume it from an analog source. So teachers and students are consuming knowledge and content information. The average impact, 0.34. This is similar to just playing country roads over and over and over and over again. You're not going to get better. You're not going to get better. You got to go through another stage that I call transformational technology use. That puts the student at the focus of the experience. In transformational technology use, the use of the tools transforms the substance of the learner. The child now knows more than he or she did before. They're a different person. They don't see the same novice mistakes in the same way. There are two elements to the transformational technologies. One is production. It's important that students produce representations of their knowledge. So there are three strategies in this element where students produce their own mastery goals that are aligned very tightly to the learning intentions and success criteria provided by the teacher. I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that students need to just create their own goals and just go wherever they want. We have a set of standards. Those standards need to be unpacked into measurement topics. Those measurement topics need to be turned into learning intentions and success criteria. What does success look like? What is the intention of the learning? And when students produce their own mastery goals, monitor and track their progress, their effort, and their affect, and then actively evaluate their own learning and assess their growth, they are now in the focus. They're not relying on a teacher to tell them what he or she knows and can do, but they know what they know what they can do, and they know how they think about it. The second element is contribution, and that's where students are using technologies to create new tutorials, to teach others what they now know. Kids teaching kids is the only strategy that works at all three levels of Hattie's framework: surface learning, deeper learning, and knowledge transfer. When students are engaged in contributing their understanding to others, they are, in effect, transferring their knowledge. Instead of having kids simply consume tutorials, have your students produce tutorials to teach someone what they now know. Now, there are three strategies in the production element. 3 strategies in contribution. That's not very much. There's only 6 strategies. When teachers get comfortable at turning over those strategies to students, the effect size is enormous. In my book, Robert Marzano wrote the foreword of my book, and actually I'm a co-author in a book that's important here in Arkansas, the High Reliability Schools Handbook. I'm convinced that the strategies in the T3 framework will help schools make a quantum leap to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th levels of the HRS Reliability Handbook. Here's why. Because the research shows compounding evidence, that's level 4 reliability and evidence, shows that the strategies in the T2 domain have an effect size of 1.6. 1.6 is equivalent to 4 additional years of academic achievement in a single year, maybe even more. Compounding evidence conducted by myself, by Robert Marzano, Mark Hasted, et al. That is not a 0.34. Remember, the average impact of technology is 0.34. The T2 domain effect sizes are literally off the scale. It's a quadrupling of achievement. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a moonshot. That's a moonshot. So when I told you that we can double academic achievement, I'm kinda undershooting it. We can do more. Transformational technology use builds mastery for current learning. It helps students master current knowledge. We have to do that first. Kids have to master current learning. But that's not the only purpose of education. That achieves half of the purpose of education. So let me ask you this. Turn to the person next to you. How might you explain the differences between translational and transformational technology use and its impact on student achievement? Cluster yourselves up and have a chat. And how would you describe the differences and its impact? Have a moment to discuss that. Okay, if you could bring your conversations to comfortable closure. Keep thinking about this. Keep thinking about the differences. The T3 framework is a lens through which we can best measure the high reliability use of technology from low reliability use of technology. All right, let's look at the final domain, the transcendent domain. To transcend means to go above and beyond the expectations and limitations. It's to, achieve those quixotic, impossible dreams. I think transcendent technology use will help prepare students for future learning by going above and beyond the expectations for which public education was originally devised. There are two elements, inquiry design and social entrepreneurship. Let's look at the first one. It's important for students to wrestle with wicked, ill-structured problems that matter to them. If we constantly give students problems that are well-stated, well-defined, and have one right answer, we're not preparing them for the future. We need to have kids engage in identifying, investigating, and hypothesizing solutions to wicked problems that matter to them. And I use the global goals for development, the sustainable development goals by the United Nations. These are 17 domains of wicked problems that matter to kids. Have kids explore each domain. Find what matters to them. Because when a child's passion pilot light is lit, it'll never go out. The next element is called social entrepreneurship. And it's an interesting phrasing. It's both a combination of social justice, social problem solving, and entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurship is essentially the process of iteratively reviewing and reproducing solutions, regenerating solutions in an iterative fashion to wicked problems that matter to kids. And they could be social, cultural, environmental, economic problems that matter. We now have the opportunity for kids to use new tools and new environments, not just to learn new things, but to create new tools and new environments by solving wicked problems that matter to them. Now, I'd submit that transcendent technology use builds mastery for future learning. And that satisfies the purpose of education, is to prepare students to master current problems and master future learning problems. So in essence, the T3 framework is really a language. It's a common language of innovation that has been working in schools all over the world. Translational, transformational, transcendent. And I can say with high reliability, a classroom, a school, a district, a nation that implements the T3 framework will see an acceleration in student achievement and over time, a doubling of academic achievement, possibly more. But don't take my word for it. This is what other folks have had to say about it. Robert Marzano wrote the foreword to my book, and he said it's a clear, attainable, inspirational vision for the future. Michael Fullen called the T3 framework a brilliant breakthrough in our understanding and use of technology for learning. Yang Zhao called it a powerful proposal and a compelling vision worth pursuing. Alan November calls me an innovation Sherpa who will lead us all up the mountain of education reform. And John Hattie, whose work we all rely on, said the T3 framework is credible, it's powerful, and exciting. Let's do it. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, I am really honored to share this with you. The T3 framework and my research was just inducted into the University of Oxford's Research Encyclopedia for Education. And it's a way for us to really vet our models and our tools. The T3 framework is now the only model for reliably accelerating student achievement that exists in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia for Education. It is the most reliable way to double academic achievement in Arkansas and in these United States. So I invite you to take the T3 challenge. Take the T3 challenge. Become fluid and agile with T1, T2, and T3 teaching and learning. Sign up for the T3 Academy and become certified as a T1, T2, or T3 coach or teacher or leader. The T3 Academy now has graduate level courses, so folks can earn graduate credits for each course, 3 graduate credits for each of the 3 courses. So now I want you to do something else. Imagine you've accepted this T3 challenge. Imagine you've just accepted the challenge that I've laid for you. What's your first step? What's the next thing you're going to do to realize education's moonshot? If you're interested, here's a QR code with more information about the T3 framework and about my work so you can get started in doubling achievement. Thank you very much for your time. My name's Sonny Magana. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you.